Over the past week, I have found myself doing what a lot of you probably have done. I have been, with all the Christmas festivities and everything happening, been pulling out my phone and looking at pictures from the past year and just remembering things that maybe I had forgotten about, just laughing at different moments. And you start to realize when you do that just how much life is crammed into 1 year. And so one of the ways that we reflect as our family, this is something that Jody does every year in our house. This is a yearbook, and so she does this for each one of our kids and then also our family, so this is a lot of work. But this is our Melton Family 2021, and so I just grabbed this one, and so she does this every year. And she just literally will put together pictures throughout the year, make little comments of just what happened in our kids' and our family's life that year. And so what's funny, though, is even this morning, they didn't know I grabbed one of these. My kids get here this morning. They were in the first service, and they just grabbed it, and they just start laughing. Because this is 4 years ago. They're laughing about things they forgot about or how little they were or just different things. And so it's funny. They'll grab these books off of our shelf on a regular basis and just start looking through there and remembering things that happened years ago. So this is just one of the ways that we do this. But whenever you start to look at pictures, when you start reflecting back, all those little moments, they start to come back to life. You remember where you were. You remember the emotions that go into it. You remember all those different things. And it's fun to reflect back on the year. And so I wanted to give you all a little bit of a glimpse into our life. So I decided I would just show you a few pictures of things that happened this year in our family. And so I've got a few pictures I'm going to show up on the board. Just give you a little glimpse into the window of the Melton family. This is one that we all had in common. On January 25th this last year, it snowed in Houston. Now, we came from Kansas City, and so this is the first time my kids had really seen snow, even though it was only like 2 inches. It's still, a lot for Houston. And so I remember we got out, we pulled out the coats for the first time in 7 years, and we put socks on the kids' hands because we didn't have gloves. And let me just tell you, socks don't work, but it was still fun because we're like, what do we put on our hands? We don't have gloves anymore. And then we get the boogie boards out because nobody has sleds around here, and that doesn't work on the snow either, which I know most of the kids in our neighborhood had water, boogie boards, and that's what you do in Houston whenever it snows. And so it was just a moment that it was fun because it's going to be 75 tomorrow, so therefore the snow is not going to last very long. So it's just one of those moments that you stop and enjoy because it's not going to be here for long. In February, Jody and I, we got to go on a marriage enrichment retreat, just something that her and I, with just us two, without the kids, we got to go to north of Atlanta to a little Chick-fil-A conference area, which was just incredible. And I would highly encourage every couple to do that. And this was just some time where Jody and I got to spend together reflecting on what God has been doing. We got to spend a lot of time together praying and refocusing for the next year. And so once again, just a really cool moment for her and I to get to go do that this past year. We also like to do a lot of sports in our house, so most of our kids are involved in different things, and so this is just a few snapshots of different things the kids are involved in. We do sports as a family, and so our siblings go with all their siblings as much as they can, and so we support each other, and so that's just a big part of our life. That's just something we all love to do, and so that's once again just a snapshot of a few of the things the kids were involved in this past year, and then this next one. I love. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is Jody. Carrying all things. This is baseball life right here. And so she's literally carrying everything. And before you start judging me, because I feel some of you are like, why aren't you helping her? I wasn't there. I was coaching. Somebody else took this picture. I wasn't just standing there taking a picture, although that would have been pretty funny. And so And so that's sports life right there for Jody, literally carrying everything across the parking lot. And I think the last one, go ahead and go to the next one. Oh, this is our vacation every year. We've been up to Colorado several years in a row. We love it up there. It's just, once again, familiar places, familiar times. We get away from normal life and just be with our family and hang out together. And such an important time in our family. Then this last one, I think, is Lillee going to high school, which I am not old enough to have a high schooler. But just this picture reminds me just how fast everything goes. She's supposed to be like 3, and now she's in high school. I can say that because she's not in the service. And so, but it just reminds me of how short time is, and when you start reflecting on what God has done. And this is, that's just a snapshot into a few things. This doesn't count all the birthdays and the candles and the presents and all the other things that happen in life, all the shooting baskets out in the driveway and playing catch in the yard, all the trips to Chick-fil-A that we spent too much money on, and Starbucks. And it doesn't count all of that stuff, and it doesn't count the hundreds of meals that we've sat around our table together. The meals where people come over and enjoy life with us and share meals with us. And many of those times, as you start to reflect, those are the things that have such a big impact on your life. And whenever I reflect back on the year, it just brings me so much joy just to see what all has happened. And now that's just the good stuff. This is kind of like social media. I'm not showing you all the bad conversations. I'm not showing all the bad days. Our life is far from perfect. We have those days too. Just no fun to put those up on the screen. And so I'm showing you just the glimpses of some of the things. But here's what I have noticed. That whenever I slow down and really reflect, my heart starts to fill with gratitude, with joy. And it's not because our year was perfect. It's not because everything went the way I thought it should go. It's because God was present, and I can see how God has just tremendously blessed me and my family, and how He has been faithful. And honestly, I'm guessing just like most of you in here, you have pictures you could throw up on the screen, things that as you look back in the past year, you got moments like that too. Stories that you could tell, pictures you could put up, moments that mattered more than maybe you realized at that time. And for most of us, it's not just one thing. It's usually a mix of a lot of different things. It's things that we expected to happen and lots of things that we didn't expect to happen. Things that stretched us and pulled us and pushed us. It's all these different things. And when we look back, it really matters the way we look back, because reflection starts to give us perspective. When we just slow down and start to look at life and what God is doing. So the reflection gives us perspective. It helps us remember what's actually important. And sometimes it helps us see where God was at work even in the moments that felt pretty ordinary at the time. Some of us look back and we feel thankful for certain memories. Some of us look back and realize how much God carried us through because you've had a rough year. Some of us look back and notice the growth that happened in your life, maybe just quietly over time. And without even trying to, our memories start to tell our story. So here's the question, not just personally, but spiritually. What if looking back isn't about grading ourselves or evaluating how we did, but about recognizing God's faithfulness and letting that prepare us for what's next? And so today I just want to look at a short passage in an amazing book, the Philippians. Paul's writing this to the church of Philippi, just a few verses at the start of chapter 1. And honestly, the timing, it couldn't be better because we stand at the end of 2025 and we're looking forward to what's next and what God's doing. We're doing the same thing that Paul was doing. We're looking back, we're reflecting. But what makes Paul's reflections so interesting is where he's doing it from. He's not sitting in a really nice worship center with comfortable seats or sitting at home on his couch. Paul's in prison when he's writing this. He doesn't know what is about to happen. He doesn't know what the next few days hold. He doesn't know what the next few months hold. He just is reflecting back, and we get to have a snapshot of what he's writing to this church. And he had memories with this church in Philippi. They had a story. And he had been there literally from the very beginning. He had watched God open and change hearts and change lives. He lived with them. He taught them. He prayed with them. And years later, even right now while he's in prison when he writes this, their connection was strong. So when he looks back on the church, the Philippians, it's not this distant memory or theoretical, it's personal. And you're going to see this. And what stands out is his reflection. It doesn't lead him to frustration or self-pity, which would be really easy to do while you're sitting in prison. It leads him to gratitude. He's pulling out the yearbook. He's going, I remember that. He's looking through that. And as he's looking at these pictures, as he's reflecting and remembering, it fills him with joy. It leads him to joy. And we're going to dive into these verses from Philippians and I just take a look on how he reflects on this church and why the way that he remembers them changes everything. So this is Philippians chapter 1, verses 3 through 6. He says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always offering prayer with joy in my every prayer for you all, in view of your participation in the gospel from the first day until now. For I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. So I just want to walk through each one of these verses, but there's something important to notice about how Paul writes this section in the original Greek, and the structure helps lay out and helps us understand what he's doing. And in the Greek text, Paul builds this whole section. It's one grammatical unit, and so it's not a bunch of different thoughts. It's one phrase. And it says everything hangs off, starts with the first, the controlling verb, I think. So everything that happens after that is based on thankfulness, his remembering, his prayer, his joy, his confidence about the future. It's all based on that verb, I think. And so let me just help you understand why, at least for me, it's important to understand this and why it's a big deal. So I have a tendency to, this can be sometimes a strength, but also a weakness at times. I'm a critical thinker. I look for things that I can fix. I like solving problems. And so I don't know if any of you are like that, and that can be a good strength. But it can also, I'm always being critical about things. I'm always looking with a critical eye. I'm always trying to figure out what can be a little bit better. And Paul's looking at this in a different lens. He's looking at it with a lens with gratitude. So sometimes in those moments I can become bitter. I'm like, why did it not go the way that I wanted it to? Why didn't it happen this way? I can become irritated. But Paul looks back with gratitude, and he's choosing not to focus on the negatives, but focus on thankfulness for what God has done. And so this is something that God has shown me over the past year that, Chad, I need to work on. I've got to look through a different lens, and I am still a work in progress. But if I could grasp this one idea, I think if we all could grasp this idea, I think it would change the way we see what God is doing in our lives. And so Paul isn't bouncing from idea to idea. He's showing us one grace-shaped thought naturally leads to another. And gratitude, thankfulness is the engine that drives everything else. So that's why he begins this way. I thank my God in all my remembrance of you. So that is the controlling action. Everything that follows, it flows out of thanksgiving. And he doesn't start with correction. He doesn't lead with what the Philippians did right or wrong, which I'm sure there was plenty. They're messy, just like we are. And he doesn't begin with evaluation. He begins with worship. Thankfulness, thanksgiving to God. And that tells us something important just right away, that the way that Paul remembers the past is already shaped by what he believes about God. His remembering isn't neutral. His memories, they're filtered through grace. Paul remembers the church through the lens of grace. And so whenever he says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, he's not just saying, oh, I've got fond memories of you. He's telling us how he remembers them. He's remembering them, the Philippians, theologically. He's interpreting their story the way that God sees it. And to really understand this, you don't have to flip over there, but you can read Acts 16 about how the church of Philippi was started. And so Acts 16 gives us a brief picture of the start of this church. It talks about Lydia. Lydia was a businesswoman, successful it seems. And it says that in Acts 16:14 that God opened her heart and she believed in Jesus and her whole family was saved. And then there was an enslaved girl that was exploited and used to gain money, and God freed her from that. And then Paul was thrown into prison. This is all in Acts 16. Got beaten because people were mad at him. And then, if you remember the story, the Philippian jailer, the earthquake came, the gates fell off, they had a chance to leave, and the jailer's like, okay, I'm just going to kill myself because I'm going to die anyways if they leave. And Paul says, hey, we're here. We're here. We're not going anywhere. And it says he and his family believed. That's how this church was started. This is the church that Paul is writing to years later. These are different stories, different backgrounds, different brokenness. But they all had one thing in common, that God stepped in and intervened in their lives. And so when Paul looks back on the Philippians, these are the things that are going through his mind. He's not remembering a perfect church. These people were far from that. He's remembering a grace-built church. A church that exists because God intervened, and that matters. Because Paul had plenty of other things he could have remembered. He could have looked through the lens of suffering, where he was beaten and imprisoned. He could have let that define the memory of the Philippians, but he doesn't. And he's intentional about what defines the story. He remembers how they stood with him from the very beginning and how they continue to stand with him now while he's in prison years later. While he's in prison, they're still supporting him. But Paul doesn't deny the hard parts of the story. He just refuses those hard things to be the loudest part. And that's what it means to remember through the lens of grace. Grace doesn't ignore reality. Grace reframes it. And notice where Paul directs his gratitude. He doesn't say, I thank the Philippians, which I'm sure he was thankful for them. What does he say? He says, I thank my God. Why? Because Paul gets it. Paul understands that whatever good is happening in them is not something that they produced on their own. That's God working in them. And so let me pause. I showed you a picture of my oldest daughter. She's a freshman at College Park. And so she plays basketball at College Park. And so whenever I go to games, you'll see me in the stands. And I've usually got my phone out. And I am videotaping. Do you use videotape now? I don't even know what that is. I'm using my phone to shoot video. How about that? And so I'm shooting video of every play. And then when we get home, we have what we call film time with Dad. And this is a real thing, okay? I am not making this up. If I'm lying, I'm dying, okay? So we get home and we have film time with Dad, and my kids love it. And so after baseball games and after basketball games, film time with Dad. Oh yeah, it's fun. And so we go back through there and we'll watch all the different plays. And so she's got a basketball game tomorrow. You better believe tomorrow night we're going to be having film time with Dad. And so what we do, we go back and we look at some of the plays that she had, and some of the. We usually start out with negatives because I'm a critical person. So yeah, all the plays that didn't go well. And so, but we'll look at those and go, hey, what could you have done differently here? Hey, what were you seeing? When you're dribbling the ball down the court, what were you seeing? Did you see this person? Did you see how they're closing on you? Why did you decide to take this shot? And so we'll just look. We watch a lot of plays. And so we just look at it. But also then we go back and we look at the things that she did well. We look at the shots she did make. Hey, right here, your form was really good. Kept your elbow in, used your legs. You dribbled in, penetrated the lane. You dished it off to the open player. They got the layup. That's what you're supposed to do. And so we look back on all of that. And now, if I was criticizing my daughter, if everything I did was, why did you make that shot? Or why did you take that? Why did you pass to that person? If everything was critical, do you think she would enjoy filling time with Dad? Probably not. And so whenever I'm doing this, I'm looking at it as a coach that loves my daughter. Because if my kids want to get better at something, then that's my desire too, is to help them. And so whenever I start to have this film, whenever I do this, it's looking through a different lens. She wouldn't enjoy it if it was always critical. And so it's the same game, it's the same plays, it's a different lens that we look through. And I want you to hear this clearly. The only reason I do this is because I care deeply about my daughter, about my kids, and what they want to do. And I want to help them. And my heart in those moments is not criticism, it's development. And that's exactly what Paul is doing when he looks back on the Philippians. He's not sitting in the stands nitpicking. He's watching the film like a coach who loves deeply his players and who believes God is building something good in this church. He knows their struggles. He was with them from the first day. He knows each of their stories. And like us, they were messy. But when he looks back, he sees God working and building something good. So when you look back on your year, when you reflect, are you watching film like a critic or like a coach who believes God is still working? Are you only seeing what didn't go right? Or are you seeing how grace showed up and how growth happened? Because the lens that you use to look back will shape the confidence you have to carry forward. This is verses 4 and 5. So we see in verse 3, he tells us how he remembered. And now, through the lens of grace, he tells us why. So verses 4 and 5, always offering prayer with joy in my every prayer for you all, in view of your participation in the gospel from the first day until now. So Paul said his prayers are marked by joy. And the reason is very specific. He says their participation in the gospel. And the word participation there is this word koinōnia. You might have heard it before. Koinonia is it's not just a casual friendship. It's this deep relationship. It's almost like a family. And we see this in Acts 2. After Peter's preaching the day of Pentecost, the church gathers for the first time. And we see in Acts 2:42, it says they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. And that word fellowship right there is the same word that Paul uses, that koinonia. The apostles to teaching and a fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. So the Philippians didn't just cheer Paul on from the outside. This was deeply personal. This was, they were with him. They didn't just applaud. They joined in and stayed engaged with him, it says, from the first day until now. And that participation in the gospel, Paul says it brings him joy. And isn't it joyful because everything was easy? They're human just like we are. That doesn't mean everything went the way they're supposed to. He's writing this letter from prison. But when he thinks about the church, he smiles because they showed up over and over and over again. And as I was studying this passage, this really impacted me. I'll be honest, as I said, it's easy for me to look at the critical eye. And I can look back on the year and think about, this conversation, that didn't go the way I thought it should. Or this didn't happen the way I thought it should work out. Or I didn't get this. And it's really easy for me to be able to do that. And I have a tendency to camp out on those things. Whenever I think about the church, I look back and I'm like, man, Jamie, he's not here. We'll pick on him. He never sings the songs that I like to sing. He didn't even ask me most of the time, so, what's that about? And Russell, man, he preaches long every week. And then the elders, oh, man, I spend hours in meetings with them. And it's really easy for me to look back with a critical eye and start going, looking at all the negatives of things that didn't go the way I think they should. I can replay all those things as I'm reflecting. But Paul shows us a better way to remember. Instead of replaying frustrations, he looks back at their participation. He looks at where the church leaned in together, and it fills him with joy. And whenever I look at our church through the lens of grace, I see so much to be thankful for. I do get to spend a lot of time with Jamie and Russell as a part of our lead team. Man, those guys are so incredibly talented. They're both on vacation today and left it to me, but I'm not bitter. But I love working with those guys. I spend a lot of time with those guys, and man, they're talented. And I love serving alongside of them. I'm getting to help lead the church. With our staff, we have an incredible staff. They're my friends. I love working alongside of them. And whenever I think about them, it brings me joy. We just got such a talented team. And I love being a part of our elder board. We do spend a lot of time together. This past year, we've spent many hours praying for our church, for people in our church, talking about ministry, talking about different things, talking about the future. And I love the participation in the gospel with our elder board. And whenever I start to reflect on those things, it brings me joy. And I love those guys, and they push and they pull me. And they're my friends. And so whenever I start to think with a critical lens, it leans a different way. But when I look through the lens of grace and what God has been doing, it fills me with joy because of the participation in the gospel that I get to have with them. And when people visit our church, a lot of times I'm out in the foyer, and maybe you're visiting today, and I'd love to talk to you about our church. But I love our church. And they probably get annoyed with me talking about how much I love our church and what's going on in our church. But I'm passionate about it, and I do. I love what's happening here. And this, if we just reflect on just a few things this past year, think about what God has done just here at Faith Bible Church. We started the year off, about 170 men went to our men's conference, men's retreat this past year. And Mike's not here this morning, and so I'll plug it for him. So we got another one coming up. But it's so cool to see God, a ministry that was struggling just a few years ago. And how many of you in here have joined in with that, is serving on a regular basis in the men's ministry. And that's just so much fun to celebrate. We sent over 150 people on overseas mission trips this past year. That's awesome, to expand the gospel past where we know it here, and to take the gospel to other countries and partner with other churches. We have over 800 people engaged in community on a regular basis, in life groups or small groups or men's and women's groups or recovery and support. It's something our church deeply cares about, is engaging in community. The Christian life is not supposed to be done alone. Find someone to walk with you. It's fun to celebrate that. We every Wednesday night, if you're ever up here on Wednesday nights, it's hopping up here. We have about 175 teenagers that come every week to come to small group, to come to this isn't a bunch of games and food. They're showing up to study the Bible. That's weird to me. I don't know what's going on here. And so we got hundreds of teenagers showing up every week. And we got many of you in here that are investing in them, pouring into them, showing up after you get off of work to pour into those teenagers. Back in October, we had roughly 1,000 women sitting in this auditorium for a conference, and about over 120 plus Faith Bible Church women serving all the others. I mean, that's just a handful of things that have happened this past year. There's also been tons of people that we've fixed up things in their houses. We've helped people move. We've helped people in financial crisis. Many of you serve in our kids ministry, and you're sharing the gospel and loving on those kids week in and week out. Many of you are small group leaders, serving and using your gifts in so many different ways. I could just go on, and that is participation in the gospel. That's not one person. That's not the staff. That's not the elder board. That's our church showing up together. And whenever I think about all those things, When I think about all that's happened here, it brings me joy. And it fills my heart with thankfulness. And here's the connection to the Philippians. Paul doesn't take credit for it. He doesn't say, hey, look at what I built. Look at what they built. He says, I thank my God. Because participation in the gospel is the evidence that God is at work among his people. And Paul's joy doesn't come from perfection. It comes from partnership. From seeing people say, I'm in. And when we choose to look back through that lens, through the lens of grace and the lens of participation, we don't just see all the things that went wrong. We see what God is doing. And that kind of remembering, it doesn't drain us. It fills us with joy. And most of you are here because this is your church home. And when you look back, are you looking back through the lens of grace, through what God has done? Or are you being critical about what you don't like? And that's exactly where Paul goes next, because when Paul remembers the Philippians through the lens of grace, it doesn't just fill his heart with gratitude, but it gives him confidence about their future. And that's why Paul can move from, I thank my God, to I am confident in this. Let's see how he reflects on this. This is verse 6. He says, for I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. And that word confident, it matters because confidence is not in the Philippians. It's not in how consistent they have been or even how generous they have been. Paul's confidence is where? It's in God and his faithfulness to finish what he started. He says, he who began a good work in you. In other words, this whole thing started with God. God opened Lydia's heart and she believed. He saved the enslaved girl. He saved the Philippian jailer and their family. God started it. And Paul says, God will finish it. That phrase, good work, it includes their salvation, but it's so much bigger than that. It includes everything that God has been doing in them since the moment they believed. And here's the key. Paul doesn't want to see their faithfulness as the cause of God's work. He sees it as the evidence of God's work. It's not based on them. And so therefore, Paul doesn't have to be anxious about what's going to happen in the future. Why? Because God doesn't start things and then walk away. People do that. I do that. We start strong and we fade, but God isn't like us. Paul is confident that the same God who started the work will sustain the work and will finish the work. And notice how far Paul's confidence stretches. He says, until the day of Christ Jesus. That's future language. That's Paul lifting his eyes past the point where he's at right now in prison, sitting in prison, and beyond circumstances. His hope is in what God has promised to finish. Now, he doesn't know when that day will come. He seems to live like it's coming soon. But the future certainty gives him peace in the present. And here's why this matters for us. When you look back through the lens of grace, you don't just gain gratitude, you gain confidence. Confidence that God isn't done with you yet. Confidence that the same God who carried you this far will keep carrying you forward. And maybe, just maybe, that's what some of you need to hear this morning. You're reflecting on your story. And you're like, I don't know what's next. You can't see the next step. Maybe you need to hear that God's not done with you yet. And that's where this passage moves from being something Paul believed to something that I believe and want for us. Over the past 6 months or so, several months, our staff, our elder board, our lead team, we've been praying about our vision for the next few years. What does God have in store for Faith Bible Church? Where do we want to go? What things do we want to work on? I'm really excited about what we're going to do. And you're going to be hearing a lot more about this in the coming months. But whenever I look back on this past year, I don't just see programs. I don't just see numbers. I see people. I see lives that have changed. I see stories that we show and hear about how God has changed people's lives. I see people stepping into community. I see people serving week in and week out, using and giving of their gifts and their talents and resources. I see our church pouring into and loving on our little kids here. And even at this moment, holding babies. I see small group leaders showing up for teenagers week in and week out, showing up to games. I see small group leaders leading men's and women's groups. I see recovery and support. I see all of this. I see you. I see the people in this room showing up, loving each other. And I have gotten to participate in that with you. I've walked with you. I've cried with you. I've prayed with you. Celebrated with you. We've carried hard things together. And just like Paul, whenever I start to reflect on all of the things that have happened over the last year, oh man, it fills me with joy. But it also brings confidence. Confidence that God is at work among his church. God is at work here at Faith Bible Church. And that confidence gets me excited about this next year. And this next year, we want to help people understand and experience and extend God's grace like never before. Because the same God who has been faithful in the past, the same God who opened hearts of the Philippians, who changed lives and built this church, is the same God who is already at work. And what's next? And what God has started here in 2025, I'm confident he will continue and do so many more great things with our church. So as we come to the end of the year and we're reflecting, we're looking back, we're grabbing the photo book, we're looking at all the things that have happened. We look back at some of these memories and we see how God's been faithful, how he's carried us through. And it gives us confidence for what's next. So as we look through that lens of grace, this week, I want to challenge you with two things. This week, take some time. Reflect on what God has done in your life for the past year. Not as a critic, not grading yourself, but asking, where did God show up in my life this year? And write those things down. If you journal, I highly encourage that. Write down where God showed up in your life and remember them. Paul said, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you. That can be true of us too, because God is faithful. And then second, as we look forward to 2026, look forward with participation. Ask God this bold, open-handed question. How do you want me to participate in the gospel this next year? Ask God that question. Hey God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to participate and to show up? Not just attend every once in a while. Not just observe, but step into discipleship. Hey God, is there a community I need to join? I need to start serving. Maybe I need to go on a mission trip. Maybe I need to serve in the kids ministry. Maybe I need to be more generous. Ask God that open-handed question. How do you want me to participate in the gospel this next year? Because the same God who began a good work in you is faithful to carry it on until the day of Christ Jesus. So let's look back through the lens of grace, and let's look forward this next year and take a step of faith and trust that God is still writing your story. How will you participate next year? Let's pray. God, thank you for your word. As we read the opening verses of about the church of Philippi, it brings joy. thinking about the memories of how that church started, and I know it brought a lot of joy to Paul. And Lord, I thank you for the people here and the work that you've done here, and it brings me joy. And I thank you. We give you the glory. We give you the credit. Lord, as we move into 2026, show us what you want us to do. Challenge us, stretch us, and pull us. Don't let us just sit idle. Lord, help us take that bold stance. We ask your Spirit to lead us in that. But thank you for your words. Lord, that we remember, when we remember, we look through the lens of grace and we see our stories how you see them. Not critical, but with a loving eye. Help us remember our kids like that. Help us remember our friends like that. Let us see people's stories the way you see them. Lord, thank you once again for letting us just gather and worship. And we love you. And in your name we pray. Amen.